evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for an informed conversation with the co-hosts of the Black Myths podcast, Black, Ryan, Kim, and Terrell. And this is an event that's co-sponsored by the African and Black Diaspora Studies Department, as well as the Black Cultural Center and the Center for Black Diaspora. Today, we'll be having a lovely conversation and live podcast recording about the myth of the circulating Black dollar. And we're going to talk about what it means to truly develop sustainable communities, right? And we're going to talk about specifically non and anti-capitalist solutions, right, to the problem of sustainability in Black communities, right? And as an avid listener of the podcast myself, I'm so glad to have you all as a guest here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of the rigorous research you've prepared and for you to enlighten us about your thoughts about Black liberated futures. And I'd also like to take this time to thank our student helpers, Ariana O'Donoghue and Maya Jefferson, who helped to make the flyer for the event, helped to advertise, and helped us to set up for our event today. So thank you so much for your continued support, Ariana and Maya. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce another student of ours. We have Iman Williams, who will introduce the podcast speakers today, or should I?
I think Iman is here, so I'll do it.
Okay, yes. Okay, well, I will introduce Dr. Julie Moody-Freeman, who is the chair, acting chair of the African and Black Diaspora Studies Department, and she will introduce our co-host for today. So, thank you.
I'm Julie Moody-Freeman, and I'm the interim chair for African and Black Diaspora Studies, and also the director for the Center for Black Diaspora. I first want to thank Simone, because without Simone, this would not have happened. Simone was like, we've got to do this. She brought the idea to us, and we loved it. Once I listened to the podcast, I was so excited about it. I also want to thank a very special person, the assistant director for the Center for Black Diaspora, and that is Jennifer. Jennifer Gardner has made a whole lot of things possible. Has been in contact with Simone and also all 4 members of the Black Myth podcast. So thank you so much, Jennifer. I appreciate you. So I am extremely excited and can't wait to hear this conversation. I've already got a little taste of it as I sat and had lunch with members of the Black Myth podcast. The Black Myth podcast is an informative, conversational show analyzing popular myths about Black culture of a socio-political nature, hosted by Black, Joe Clemens, Cam Lyons, Ryan Mills, and Terrell Alexander. Black is a poet, traveling and teaching artist, and author fusing historical content, current events, creative practice, and interpersonal interaction on international stages. Too Black blends critical analysis with biting sarcasm. He has headlined various stages and events, including the historic Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York City, Princeton University, and Johannesburg Theatre in South Africa. His words have been published in online publications such as Black Agenda Report, Left Voice, Blavity, and Hood Communist. Welcome, Black. Ryan, yes, please. Ryan is a board member of Muncie Outreach and executive producer of the Outcast podcast, co-host of the Black Myths podcast, writer, and an activist. Ryan's writing addresses the systematic socio-political issues that affect marginalized communities. Welcome, Ryan. Cam is an educator specializing in culturally responsive teaching and a longtime champion for Black communities. As host of the Black Myths podcast, Cam provides insightful commentary that taps into the human psychology of the myths they debunk. She is also a self-declared chef. Cam. I have to come to your house for that. Last but not least, Terrell is a DJ, producer, and outreach organizer in for the Defense Committee to Free the Pendleton 2. He is the co-host of the Black Myths podcast, bringing a needed balance of humor and humility to the show. He is also a dedicated husband and uncle. Welcome, Terrell. Welcome. All of you out in Zoomland, thanks for joining us. And for those of you here this evening, you've taken time out. We're really grateful. Look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear? All right, good. Thanks for coming out. When you do podcasts, you don't know who's listening. You never can see their faces. So I don't know who's here from school, who's here from the pod. I know some people told me they were gonna come, but I know how that goes. So we appreciate everybody that's here. Just want to say that. I know we got our intros, but I just want to kind of reintroduce ourselves, I guess, in a more informal way. So I go back to Black. I think it said Black, to Black, either one is fine. This is Kim, this is Terrell, this is Ryan. Is there anything y'all want to say?
Hey, y'all.
I'm just happy to be here, I love Chicago.
I'm here to have fun.
Yeah.
Come on, the intro sound really nice. We really just be talking shit.
That's what we talk shit. Yeah. But yeah, I go Terrell, Rail. I call him asshole, so.
Wow. All right, so today we're gonna, for those who do listen, for those who will hear this once we upload it to our pod, we're gonna try to do this normal as our show would be, but it's gonna be a little shorter. Sometimes we be talking forever. And if y'all seen some of the edits, it's even like, for those who listen, the edits be like 3 hours. So I'll be getting it down an hour and a half, 2 hours. So today we only got about an hour. So there will be a part 2 within our normal flow of things. For those who don't know our show and kind of our format, we're pretty informal. We'll do a Q&A at the end if we have time. But our point here is to take myths said about Black people or perpetuated about Black people or just things that relate to Black life and debunk those, not just for the fun of it being like some kind of Jeopardy episode and just saying who's right or who knows what, but we feel like if you don't have the proper framework to understand the problems that you're facing, then you can't really resolve them. So myths often redirect people towards things that don't work. And this is a perfect example of the myth of the circulating Black dollar. It's something that's not really a thing, but a lot of people genuinely think it is a thing. And if you don't know what it is, good for you. You've not been poisoned by it. So we're gonna get into that. And what we normally do is just get into our opening thoughts. So just give people a quick breakdown. The myth of the circulating Black dollar, the circulating Black dollar, for those who don't know, is this idea that Black people should keep the money that they have in their community and it should not leave the dollar, but the myth, or leave the community, I should say. But so the claim is that, and we'll get more into it later, that we don't spend with Black people. That's the ideal of it. We spend with other people, and it's our spending habits as to why we're in the position as in the bottom of the economic ladder that we're in. That's the general myth, right? So what we like to do is just get into, what were some of our thoughts and reflections when we were going through the research, and then we'll get more into like the subject matter, and we're gonna go through stats and, show where these claims came from, et cetera, et cetera. So anybody can go.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I wholeheartedly believed in the notion of the Black dollar and its circulation. As I got older, I started to look at it as a little bit of the lens of skepticism. And in preparation for this episode, I started to realize that the claim really has no legs to stand on. Unlike some of our other episodes, like the crack baby episode or DNA testing equals ancestry episode, it kind of shows how scientific research is contorted and misused to push an agenda. But in this case, there's really no significant study or research to even make this claim. The only thing that really is giving it legitimacy is the fact that it's being repeated over and over again by Black celebrities, Black business owners, and the members of the Black bourgeoisie. And you'll start to see that as the episode goes on.
I say all the time on our podcast episode that it's really ironic that like once you have the information, you kind of just question like, why don't we all just recognize this as common sense? But the work that we do is essentially reminding us constantly and humbling ourselves to think like this is intentional why these myths are perpetuated. And I too grew up and thinking that, as a community, we need to keep our money in-house or that, in order for us to be stronger. And as a person who actively aims to still support and buy things from Black businesses, though, it also is a way through this work of like reframing how we think about these things, of saying like, yes, it still is important to be community centered and to focus in community, but just spending my money is not gonna just solve all those problems, or telling Black people that because you choose to patron elsewhere, for whatever the reason may be, that you are at fault for the plight of the rest of us. And these things continue to allow white supremacist systems to make us feel like we are the problem for larger things at hand.
I think from a young age, we were, especially me, we were taught, hey, you got to support the community, you got to buy Black, you got to do this, and nothing wrong with that. But the reasoning behind it, like the circulating dollar, no one ever really just broke it down. So like you just kind of accepted it for, face value, and nobody really thought about it. And as we started, you get older, and I started working in finance, and I started learning how money actually circulates, or how the dollar actually works, how financing and all that works. And some stuff just doesn't add up. And, because nobody ever did an intense study on it, I never went any further than that, other than what we're doing today. And, within learning all this, it's not something that we should keep perpetuating. We shouldn't really even be talking about it, but we have to, because we have to let people know this isn't something that's real.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's heard buy Black, support Black business, bank Black, what's some other ones? Black buying power, there's a whole book on that called The Myth of Black Buying Power and Propaganda. All of those things are kind of cousins or associated with this, so we're gonna hit a little bit of all those things. So what we normally do is I'll read a monologue to kind of give us a deeper kind of sense of our philosophical approach to why we're doing this. And then what we're gonna do is go through this PowerPoint. We're gonna get into the facts of the matter and such. Is that cool with everybody? All right, I don't wanna talk like we're talking to computers.
How many of y'all have heard this myth before?
You already
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. On the Black Myths podcast, we strive to take Black people seriously, and thus the conditions we find ourselves under. If the goal is honestly Black liberation, then the least we can do is provide Black people with a rigorous, accurate assessment of the oppression we face. It is much easier to escape a fire when you know the layout of the burning building. It is intelligent to know your opponent's strengths, weaknesses, and tendencies before you step into the ring. It is wise to know how to operate a gun before you point it and make the consequential choice to pull the trigger. You cannot say that you love Black people if you send them to battle unprepared and unequipped. When we seek out to debunk fantastical myths such as the circulating Black dollar, our goal is not to shit on Black people's desire for political or economic self-determination, but instead to arm them with the necessary information to achieve it. Unfortunately, Black capitalism, as it's practiced today, neither informs nor arms us with the requisite tools to achieve either. Let's consider the numbers. According to the U.S. Census data, there are 3.12 million Black-owned businesses in the United States, but only 4% have employees of the over 3 million. Of the over 3 million Black businesses, they generated $206 billion in revenue in 2020, as an example. That only accounts for 0.3% of all business revenue in the United States. As a comparison, according to Statista, Walmart generated about $524 billion in revenue in 2020. What this means is that All Black businesses, put that on the left, every Black business in the United States as a whole conglomerate generated like less than half the amount of one business at Walmart. So that's the condition that we're looking at. So if this is the case, this doesn't just, and that doesn't even account for profit, right? That's just revenue. So that doesn't even mean that those businesses technically made any money. So let's consider banking. According to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corp, FDIC, as of 2020, there were 18 Black-owned banks. They held combined assets totaling $4.58 billion. That's less than 0.03% of all banking assets. Again, as a comparison, JP Morgan Chase has nearly $4 trillion in assets, according to Macro Trends. Bank of America is at $3 trillion in assets. So again, all Black banks on one side put together don't even sniff just Chase. Chase made more money just in the last quarter than all their assets put together. So these gargantuan disparities are not because a mythical Black dollar doesn't circulate enough in the hood. It ain't because niggas buy Jordans or rims or video games, nor date bus drivers instead of bus owners. It certainly, it certainly ain't the quote unquote bigotry of low expectations. At the end of the day, it ain't Black people's spending habits that produce monopolies. That's a function of capitalism. Big capitalists eat small capitalists. They either buy their competition or they crush it. Nebulous phrases like the racial wealth gap or income inequality fail to capture this phenomenon when gaps and inequality is built into the nature of capital. When integration began, it was the integration of markets, not people. The monopolies of Black customers that segregation gave Black business were slowly dissolved by multinational corporations with more capital and power that could offer cheaper and more efficient services. As author and banking law professor Mirza Barada said, quote, "The truth was that segregated communities could not segregate their money," end quote. Segregation was a policy to create a colony of cheap labor for Southern white capital, not an independent economy of circulating Black dollars. Instead of confronting this assault, many Black bank owners and members of the Black bourgeoisie during Jim Crow blamed poor Black people spending habits for why their businesses weren't more profitable. The same is true today as Black capitalists record podcasts and write books, charging Black people for advice on how to invest their money. So, sorry, I lost my spot. Almost always some version of the Black circulating dollar is attached to these myths. And they do not want to address the exploits of capitalism. It is better for them to sell the narrative that our economically inferior position is our fault than to betray the masters who employ them to sell it. However, if we want to understand our conditions and better yet do something about it, we must study beyond the myths given to us, because if we love Black people, then Black people deserve rigor. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna get into this, where this shit came from. And we're gonna have 3 points of emphasis to debunk this myth. It's gonna be where the claim came from, what is the idea of a community, like what does that even mean? And how can you clarify, quantify this concept of circulation as is discussed? So we'll try to pinpoint the claim. This claim initially came, well, before we even get to the book, this claim has been stated on, I just want to show it so people don't think we're just making this up out of thin air. Roland Martin and Maggie Anderson, who wrote the book, Our Black Year. That's a book where she tried to spin with Black businesses for an entire year and was not very successful, but she tried. And they repeat this quote. This was in We Buy Black, the founder, Sharif Abdul Malik. He is the founder, he claims he is the founder of the Buy Black movement. And he also created the site WeBuyBlack.com. I found this in a FAMU article. It's on the Greenwood app, banking app that was started by the Atlanta-based rapper Killer Mike and a celebrity actor, what's his name, Jesse Williams. And this is repeated on their site as well. They also, people like to say this shit about Black Wall Street. If anyone's ever listened to our show, we've done a debunking of a lot of stuff people feel about that as well. But the claim originally came from this shitty book right here. It's called Talking Dollars and Making Sense. It did neither. So a wealth building guide for African Americans is by Brooke Stevens. In 1997, she claimed, this is the original thing that it said. It's off my screen. All right. John Ray, this is in 1997. John Ray, an economic development specialist in Washington, D.C., did a study that traced the flow of dollars through comparative ethnic communities. Now, before we even get any further, y'all can jump in whenever. She doesn't say who this man worked for. She doesn't say who he did the study for.
How many people were in the study?
No.
Y'all are college students. Y'all know how this works.
Right.
Yeah, you made a joke on one of the research things. Said might as well just said John Doe because we don't know who John Ray is.
Yeah. Could have said John Doe, Ken, Barbie, whatever. Right. And also notice it says did a study.
A study, yeah.
A study.
On
A
what?
study.
What?
No claim.
And then when you go through the book, it's on page 18, there's no citation at the bottom of said study. It doesn't tell you where the study is. The only thing at the bottom is a quote I don't even think Dr. King said. It says, Black folks buy what they want and then beg for what they need. Don't really sound like Dr. King. I think I know enough about that to know it's not him. And it doesn't say when he said it. There's not a date attached here. There's not a place and time, any of that. It just says Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, anyone who's lived through Martin Luther King Day on any social media sees a lot of people make up shit that Dr. King never said. So she was just early, in doing that, I guess.
She would have been wild on Twitter.
Yeah.
She's a pioneer.
Yeah. So there's that. But so again, just want to stop there and point that out. So since he says, Ray found that in the Asian community, a dollar circulates among the community banks, brokers, shopkeepers, and business professionals for 28 days before it is spent with its outsiders. And it's important because most of the time people don't put this part in here about the shopkeepers, the banks, the brokers. They just say it circulates in it. She does specify where it goes. So that would mean the study would have had to talk to these people, but
I don't know what Asian community she was in.
Right.
Or what she's defining as Asian, what particular Asian community she was in. But she just was talking out her neck.
yeah.
Yeah.
In the Jewish community, the circulation period was 19 days, but in the African American community, 6 hours. So when you read this, if you don't know shit, you like, damn, man, our shit only stays in the hood for 6 hours. They doing this shit for almost a month. Somebody else is doing it for three quarters of the month, and our shit don't even last a day. So it makes you look like, you're behind, backwards, and just the same stereotypical things about Black people, right? So this has been said, like we said, by tons of people who we're told to take seriously about money. So we just want to get into that. So Truth Be Told News did an article on this. They didn't get everything right, so we were going to add more, but they did clarify some things. So they actually reached out to try to understand, where the hell did you get this from, right? And this is what they found. There's no reference to the original source of data. Stevens attributes the data to a John Ray, who was described as we said, as economic development specialist. In an interview, Stevens said, Ray and the co-author Lee Green did a study over a 6-month period in 1992, possibly through a nonprofit that no longer exists. So she didn't even know what the nonprofit was. I mean, I don't know if I did a study this groundbreaking, I'd like to at least remember, the name, but so be it. She did not remember the name of the report and could not provide any more information about Ray or Green, beyond saying that Ray might have taught at Howard University in '93.
May have.
Possibly.
They also couldn't find anything that he had co-authored or any other study that he ever did. She also never materialized any evidence at all that the study took place.
Might as well said I came up with it, and at least I'm here. You guys
This year, yeah.
I was in Chinatown for 28 days and I just made all the money. Yeah, that's basically
She's
what.
like, wow, they spent a lot of money here.
Yeah, I guess it must be 28. I was there for 28 days, So in addition, Truth Be Told News was unable to locate Lee Green or any studies co-authored by him. So they looked this up, couldn't find anything. I followed through, we followed through and did the same. It's not on like LexisNexis or any of that. We couldn't find it. So, you know, there's no media coverage of the study that can be found. It's in LexisNexis, nothing. So there's no like, this is already something we really could stop here. Like, there's no evidence of any of this, but so much is based.
Case closed.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
Myth debunked. We're done.
Because the study that you base your claim on, that gave you notoriety, right? Don't remember the name of the report, you can't provide the name of the people involved in the study, so like, there's not even a record of him in the university, right?
No. Again, Barbie Ken doll, John Doe, whatever, like we don't know who this person is.
And very similar to harmful stereotypes, we know what happens. Things like this get said by somebody with even a lick of credibility, and then folks are running with it. And now here we are 2 decades later, having to come and let folks know who may not actually know that this is bullshit, and that's not a real thing.
And in response to George Floyd getting killed, this is the solution. It's a focus on trying to make a dollar circulate, in which the study has no basis. So this is what we're saying, like, Black people deserve rigor. Black people deserve serious study. If you're trying to resolve something like that, you don't just grab made up claims. All right, so she talks about community in this, right? Like, what's the community? What's that mean? So let's just do some basic things. So she says Asians community, right? How many countries are in Asia?
48 countries.
So you just put all those countries and communities together. But some people say, maybe it's just a census definition, because technically, like, Russia is in Asia. A lot of places are in Asia. It's a fucking continent. So you want a census definition of Asian, right? You can read that.
So a person having origins in any of the original peoples in the Far East, which is 6 countries, Southeast Asia, which is 11 countries, the Indian subcontinent, which is 7 countries, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippine Islands, Thailand, and Vietnam.
So then there's the assumption that all of the folks who are under the umbrella of being Asian magically are all just playing kumbaya in every single neighborhood, or they all just converge in one place, apparently, because that's where she spent her time, in one sole Asian community in, I don't know what state or country, she doesn't say either, for 28 days, and then she found out all the money was circulating. But
And not only that, they're not a monolith. They all have their own different cultures. There's all different traditions. Yeah.
And how you gonna spend, she said it was a 6-month study. How you gonna spend this much time in this many communities and you only needed 6 months? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's I mean, what is 6, 11, 7, was it like 24 countries? And again, a lot of these people they do live in their communities, but they don't all get along. I mean, as an example, Chinese and Japanese is not a story we got along. Japanese tried to colonize, so they did colonize the Chinese. And, it was 2 whole wars fought, as we see here. The Sino-Japanese War and the Second Sino-Japanese War were fought between these countries. So the idea that they all just fall into this melting pot, that's not how it's ever worked. And if you talk to anyone in the quote unquote Asian community, as we say, that's a very nebulous term. Talk to anyone in these actual ethnicities, it ain't that simple. And I'm not saying everybody doesn't get along, but they don't all get along.
nor does everybody live together. Like,
Yeah.
not every single person that is Chinese will live in Chinatown or in Koreatown or in all these spaces. And even if you're focusing on these small communities that have a whole space, that then eliminates the understanding that folks will live elsewhere, that folks will live in community with other people, that other groups of Asians who may not have a specific area of a city that is well known, that they don't exist. And so when we're identifying like who she's talking about, she's just continuing to just pull things out her ass, but not even just condemning Brooke, thinking of folks in general who make these generalizations. It's like, where are you basing that from? It's oftentimes that when we do this work, it's not just to call out the people who have claim, who are saying all of these things, but also as a challenge to then think for ourselves, like, what do we define as community when we are thinking of Asian communities? Who's the first that come to your mind? What groups are coming to your mind? When you think of a Black community, what do you think of? Is it just wherever Martin Luther King Boulevard sign is at?
Or Chinatown, like I said, or Koreatown. And it assumes that these communities well, however we would choose to define communities, don't have their own class contradictions. Like everybody that's in Chinatown is all just spending their money with each other and they all get along. And that's not true either. Even if you just go to China, you just want to take that one example, like it's not true. So it assumes that because we hear the term Chinatown, it's like, oh, they got their own this, and it's actually not that simple. And it plays on a lot of model minority myths, the model minority kind of stereotypes too.
It's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, to sum it up, yeah.
It's fucked up.
So then she says Jews, and some of these folks, as you saw earlier, say whites and Jews. And I don't know if you noticed, some people seem to like take her original claim and just add shit to it that she didn't even say. But again, Jewish people, and this is not any to be anti-Semitic or anything, this is a statement of fact. Most Jewish people, 96% of them identify as white on the census. So which one is it? So when you say the Jewish community and the white community, it assumes that Jews all live in their own separate community and whites all live in their separate community, when Jews and whites can literally be the same thing. Jews and blacks can be the same thing. Jews and a lot of things can be the same thing, right? So what do you mean by Jews? Like, so that's also playing on a very anti-Semitic trope that, you know, there's this finance class of Jews that run the world or something like that, because they don't all live in the same community. Now, you know, Cam used to live in New York. Jews do have their own community in New York, but it ain't like that everywhere.
And that's a specific subset of Jewish people. And even within that, Hasidic Jews in New York don't just all live in one neighborhood. They live in many neighborhoods. They also live in neighborhoods that are in community with plenty of people of color and other white people. And they don't all just spend their money in Hasidic shops.
It's not possible. So yeah, that doesn't hold up. And then again, the ultimate question is what defines community? So how many Black people need to be in a community for it to be a Black community? You know, it's 50, 60, 70%. Does it just mean it needs to be the majority of people? And then what does that say about everybody else that lives there, right? So if it's like 54%, what does it say about the 46% of people living in the neighborhood? What lines do you even draw? What area?
Are we only talking about the 8% of Black folks in the DePaul community?
Yeah.
Are we talking about all the Black people that live in Chicago? When we talk Black community, are we including the random Black people that live in Milwaukee or in North Dakota?
Yeah, like where do there ain't no Black people in North Dakota, but
I think this last time I looked, there's like
there's
27.
like one. Yeah.
They're all why.
Yeah.
What y'all doing up there?
I mean, half more power to you, right? So
Hey, I mean, hey, do you? But
Yeah.
Chilling with the buffalo.
what exactly are you doing up there? Chilling with the buffalo? Wow.
I want to do this real quick. I'm gonna stop, share, then I'm gonna share again just to make sure this covers the internet as well.
I think it's so easy as he pulls this map up, like when we think of community in a social setting, right? Like Black Twitter is a wonderful place where we realize that so many of us within the Black cultural community have a lot of similar experiences. But even that, there's often conversation about like, that's so funny. These things are very similar, but these things are different. This is a regional thing. This makes sense for folks that live in the South, but this might not happen on the West Coast. And so if we can even understand that in simple terms of things that might really bind us together culturally and still be able to say like, yeah, that's cute, y'all do that down there, but that's not how we do this up here, then how would we think about community when it comes to money? Like there will obviously be differences.
Exactly.
The way that people might be on the South side might not be how people are on the West, just here in this city. So
And we know anybody that's from the hood or live in the hood, you know there's always like weird beefs between one hood over the other. Like, I mean, I know we in Chicago, like West Side, South Side is its own thing. You know, so it's not like they'll say people on the South Side of the country or whatever. Like, I've heard these debates between my Chicago friends, so it's also just not that simple. So here's a map of racial composition for neighborhoods. So they drew up the justice map, like basically anything that's red is Black folks, anything that's like purple is white people, anything that's blue is Hispanics, and anything that's green is Asians. So what this is doing is saying, and again, Asian, right? So what this is doing is saying like, just to give you a sense of community. So they really did it by like the quadrant, right? So you see over here, this is 100% Black. Like no white people live over here. But then you go to a little lighter area, this is 82% Black. You come over here, this is 85% Black. So, but then you zoom out and you're gonna get, you know, a whole different thing. You'll get, you know, this is 92% white, this is 78%. I think y'all get the point.
And this is block by block.
Yeah.
This is all in one community.
Right, so it's like, and they chose to define this stuff pretty distinctly, like broken down in this, like you said, block by blocks areas. You also get to see how segregated, particularly a city like this is, because you can see the numbers are pretty, you know, obvious where people live, and this tracks with just, if you drive around. But some of these places, like over here, it's only 50% Hispanic. So is that a Hispanic community? Just to give you a sense of like the space and kind of geography of it, it's just not reducible to that in her study. So if she studied here, like she's not gonna get the same thing she's gonna get even here in this darker blue right here, right? Like if I wanna study Black people here where it's 97%, it's not gonna be the same thing as Black people here where it's 87% or it's anything less. Like it breaks down differently depending on where you go. So again, how do you, here, look, this is 62%. So it's like, where do you define, you know, ain't none of this stuff makes sense. All right, back to it.
When we're talking money, like community priorities are gonna differ.
Yeah.
The needs of folks down in Baton Rouge are gonna look very different from the needs in California, which will look different from the needs in Brooklyn, which will look different from the needs in Chicago. And so even when thinking about that, when we talk money, how people are spending money is gonna differ based on the needs of your community. Even if you're focused on keeping money in the community, then if you're just lumping everyone together, how are you defining what's wasteful or how
Right.
we're not supporting one another? If your priority in your community right now is folks just need to get groceries on their table, and so they're not necessarily able to go to the Black-owned coffee shop and spend $8 on a latte or go to the Black bookstore because they're not patroning there frequently, are they not supporting their community by just living there and staying put and being alive and breathing?
Yeah, and all those communities we just showed don't have the same income level. We don't have time to go through that, but like there's different incomes and that map does that. So it's a good map overall. So defining circulation, this is where we just get to the kind of nuts and bolts of it all. So how would you even go about tracking a dollar anyway? Like what would even be the basis for it? Where would you get the data? Currently the government, no government department or private organization tracks consumer spending, has necessary resources to know how long a dollar circulates. It's not possible anyway, but most data that you get about where people spend their money are surveys. It's not people breaking into your bank account and tracking all your expenditures and saying, okay, they put their money in the Black community today and today is in the white community. That's not how it works. Like there's surveys and they use a sample size and they come up with a sense of, okay, generally speaking, this group does this more often than not, this is what they do. Even if relatively true, our circulation claim made the year 1997 the same as 2023. So why are you saying the same thing that someone said in 1997 today? You know, some people weren't even in this room, probably weren't even born in 97. The internet wasn't even really a thing like that in 97. Money was moving differently. So how is it even the same thing? And then this is really the primary point here. Spending is not a binary. When a dollar is spent, some money leaves the community, some stays. If you go to Walmart, no matter where you are, rich neighborhood, poor, Black, white, doesn't really matter, and you buy anything, say you buy some chicken wings, I don't know, I'm hungry, I guess.
I'm about to say, don't buy steak at Walmart, bro. Please don't tell me. Do not tell me you're out here buying steak at Walmart.
I didn't say steak.
I'm reading it here. It
Oh,
says
yeah,
steak.
you're right.
Let me find out.
And that's that poor Black spending, right? So you buy whatever you buy it. It's not a binary. Like some people who work there live in the neighborhood. So they're gonna get paid, and the money gonna stay there. And then the steak probably wasn't made in your neighborhood, right? Like the cow didn't get killed and slaughtered in your backyard. It got to be sent in, right?
I hope not.
Right. so there's no way in hell that the cow, the shelf, the material that to put the food on the shelves, all of that stuff has to be imported in. It's not something that all things don't exist in any one community. It literally makes no sense. Like you don't even need all the stats. Just literally think about it. everything in this room right now, DePaul did not make everything in this room. These chairs came from somewhere else. You know, the projector, probably most things in here came from somewhere else. None of this came from DePaul. DePaul doesn't even produce this. It's not a college for this, right? So
Unless
that's
I got a factory that we don't know
Yeah.
about, and that's how y'all paying tuition if they got all of y'all working.
You
Anybody
guys contract
in here build a
workers.
chair today? Let me know.
yeah. And did you
Yeah.
grow the materials on campus that then go into the chair? Did you refine oil? Did you get, you know, the phones you have in your hand? Did you go to was it not the Congo? Was it actually here that you got the culture that goes into your phone to power the battery? Like this isn't even a normal thing. So no matter how rich or poor or black or white, money is always gonna leave. And it ain't staying, if money stays in the community for 28 days, the whole Asian thing, that wouldn't be a good thing
At all.
right? If you imagine if you had to sit in your community for 28 days and nothing was imported in, you would starve, you wouldn't have electricity, all the basic needs that you would need would not be there if it stayed in the community. So leaving the community is doesn't define whether or not it's even a good or bad thing. It probably ain't even 6 hours for most communities, regardless of their income level, wealth, whatever. Unless you have a compound that services everything you need, money gonna leave the community. And some of it's gonna stay because some of us work here, some of us bank here, whatever. It's not a one or the other thing.
And we live in a global market.
Yeah.
So like you wouldn't even want your money to leave. And just saying like where the dollar is going is not even a good metric for like how to calculate all your money. It's different if somebody was like, oh, for every dollar that was spent in Chicago on the South Side, 5% of it stayed and was going to community support for the roads, schools, clothing, groceries. 35% of it might actually go towards the manufacturing. 20% of that is going towards the pigs, and then 15% are going towards workers. Like if the research was done in that capacity, there'd be a larger understanding at least of like what's happening within a community and where those funds are going and how to be able to better redirect them versus just telling folks, well, y'all spending y'all money and it's leaving your community and that's why it's falling apart.
Like,
Yeah. And to go off of what they're saying, see how complicated it is to even come up with a metric to measure that. But how somehow they able to make the claim that you're able to measure that during Black Wall Street in its height? Like how would you go about doing that? It makes no sense.
Yeah, she does say later in the book that Black Wall Street, their dollar circulated for 3 years.
For 3 years.
For 3 years?
It's that.
Again,
We don't have
measure
time to
that?
get into that, but we did an episode of Black Wall Street, the myth that Black Wall Street was self-sustaining. Yeah. The money,
check out that episode though.
the money multiplier effect. I added this late. I'm gonna zoom through this because I want to get some time for questions. So this is in a good book, The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. Essentially fractional reserve lending. So I'll just read it. Banks create money and wealth through fractional reserve lending by lending customer deposits. Banks create new money. They multiply existing money in the process called the money multiplier effect. So we all, 4 of us, put our money in the bank, $100 a piece, $400. The bank takes $350 and they give it to one of you as a loan, right? And then you take that loan and when you couldn't buy a house, but let's say hypothetically, you took the money that was loaned to you and you bought a house. And then the person that you sold it to took their money and put it in the bank. So now more money is created than the initial money that we deposited because they loaned it and then it multiplied, right? So if everybody in that process is all on the same chain, that's fine. But what she studied back during segregation, but during Jim Crow, is you have Black people who would put money in Black banks. Black banks would make a loan, somebody would go buy a home, but then the person they bought the home from was white because Black people didn't have any wealth. So they buy the home from a white person, and they would take all the money that came out of the bank and they would just put it in their white bank. And that's so what ended up happening was Black banks became an extractor of quote unquote Black wealth to send to white folks because Black people didn't own those means of production, they didn't own the home or anything of that nature. And also because Black people's wages were so suppressed during that time, Black banks, and even to this day, really have to keep more money in their banks than typical banks. That's why their assets were so low. So they can't be as aggressive in sending out loans because they have to keep more money because the people who put money in the bank don't have as much. Sometimes they got to withdraw it because they don't have that much cash, right? So if you were to even think about circulation, it would have to be the whole economy is segregated and we only deal with each other. Then maybe the money can multiply. But what ends up happening is we take that money and we go to the people who have the most money to buy things from them. We can't go to each other because most of us don't have enough wealth to do it. So then you get to a question. I already said all that. I'm gonna skip this, even though I think it's interesting. This is just what is the means of production, right? So means of production is essentially like who owns the things that produce wealth. So if you have a factory, if you own, like, let's use a more modern example. Any of us can make an app. What we got to do, we got to go through Apple Store or Google Store to even get that app on there. That means they get a cut no matter what, right? Because you got to go through them. That's like a tech version of the means of production. So you have the modes of production. It's like 3 different kind of categories. As the method of producing the essentials or the necessities of life, whether that be health, food, housing, needs of education, science, nurturing, etc. The productive forces of the unity of means of production and labor. That is, when you make something, you need labor, you need the tools and the machinery to do it, and you need the raw materials that you put into it. The people who control those things, we all have to go through to do anything else. No matter what, if you want to start a business for, earrings or something, you got to go through the people who have the materials and who can pay for the labor and have the machinery to do it. So they always get a cut anytime somebody has an idea because they've privatized those things. Those things are not commonly owned under capitalism. Those things are owned by very few people, right? In the relations of the production, the objective material relations that exist in any society independently of human consciousness. So that's to say, we know we have materials in the ground. We know people have to do labor. We know we have machinery. What are the relationships that we set up? Are we going to make that commonly owned amongst the people, or are a few people going to own those things that then everyone else has to go through? In the United States and pretty much around the world, the decision has been made by capitalists that we are going to privatize those things and everybody must come through us.
And even the folks who somehow found a way to still hold on to some things, fun fact, they're all trying to take over that too, even
Right.
at the basis of what we would need to survive, right? We look at farming. Anybody in here pay attention to what's been happening in farming in the past couple of years? Or if not, I implore you, TikTok, go look. Even y'all have access to research data, but even then, there's folks that were small or even had large farms that were producing plenty of food, grains, meats, they're trying to buy them out and buy off their land and or steal their land to privatize it even once more. So even for local people who did have access and did have control of a very essential means of production, they're also being pushed out by white supremacist powers, even folks who are white.
Yep.
Because capitalism, at the end of the day, doesn't care. It's insidious enough to make sure that everybody is poor and just a few select get to be successful and wealthy. But of course, they're going to continue to let us all know, like, you can do this too. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
And that's what myths like this help function. They feed this idea that it's your fault. Like you're lazy, you're a bum. You don't circulate the dollar enough, whatever.
We don't own any property.
You don't-
Not
you
enough
don't
of you
own-
have an LLC.
You don't own 10 Bugattis.
My bad.
You lazy bastard.
My bad.
How dare
Inequalities,
you?
inequalities baked into the system.
Yeah. So this is the last point, and then we'll be done. We'll make 2 points, but just give people an example. There's a show where I did a more in-depth analysis to this, so we're gonna have to breeze through this because I do want to give time for people to respond. So this is called Wealth, Power, and Poverty in Indianapolis, where where most of us are from, and Indianapolis is a city in Indiana, for those who somehow may not know. But this was done in the early 70s, but it still applies here. And what they did was called a power map to map out where are the concentrations of wealth in the city of Indianapolis. But this helps really understand this like means of production idea, so it's not abstracted. So they created, that's my hand because I literally photocopied this shit. But So it's hard to see here, but if you look like Eli Lilly, who, you know, likes to like pimp out people on insulin, or Indiana Bell, some of these companies don't even exist anymore, Indianapolis Water, Jefferson Corporation, et cetera. This is an actual model of circulation, like all the trading that they do with each other, right? And you can see it's almost confusing and a headache to look at all the different like trading that they do with each other. So the different people who own the means of production trade with other folks who own the means of production, and they all make money. That's capitalist, literally. So they did an example of, there's many things in this to actually talk about how the people who are heads of these companies all do live in the same neighborhood, and they concentrate the wealth because they were able to work in these companies at the top. We're not talking about janitors and stuff in this case, Butler University's on here, et cetera. So again, I'll post this, we could possibly send this out. There's a more in-depth analysis of this, but we don't have time to get too deep into it. But then an example, like if you were to go shopping at a strip mall, like where does the money go for this whole like circulation idea? So over here, you see the circle in red is you. You show up to strip mall with your money. You're gonna go to LS Airs and you wanna buy, here you're gonna go to LS Airs and you wanna buy a TV, right? So you're getting an RCA TV. I don't even know if people use RCA TVs anymore. Let's just say it's a Samsung TV or whatever you're into, okay? So you go there to buy the TV. So the question becomes, where does this money go? Right, so you get the TV, you go to LS Airs, and then so you have the money is going to go to LS Airs, right? Because they get some cut, and then let's say even LS Airs for the sake of conversation was black owned. The TV's not. So the TV's going to go to stockholders that don't live in Indianapolis at all. They probably in this report they say these stockholders lived on the East Coast, and they probably still there. Then the money is going to go to FC Tucker and Company. FC Tucker and Company, in this case, was who built the building, who built the strip mall, because the cut has to get paid to the company that not even built, they own the strip mall, excuse me. It has to go to the people who own the building. So there's the business, there's the product, and then there's the building. The business often doesn't own the building, they're leasing. So they got to pay rent to them. And then underneath it is the people who work there. And again, all those people live in the same neighborhood. Then they have to pay the Indiana National Bank, who financed the building to be built, so the business could be there, so they could put the TV in there for you to buy it in the first place, right? So this is just, simple. So then like Jupal DeMars is the company, that's the company that actually built the building. So then they get a cut of when you buy this TV. Everybody gets a cut because a lot of times these are loans, it's finance capital, so people are paying off interest to the next person, right? And then Jefferson Company or corporation, they're the ones that provided the concrete for the building to the construction company that built the building that was financed by the bank. So LS Airs could come in and have a TV for you to go buy. So unless you own all of that, your money ain't staying anywhere. It's going to leave the community. And most places, you don't own all of that. Like that, even in Chinatown, where people want to make these stereotypes, you don't own all of that. They might own the building, they might own the companies in the building. They don't own the construction company, the bank. Like you'd have to own all of that, right? So then that's them. This is you. Your money's not gonna quote unquote stay in your community because that's the means of production. And this doesn't even cover everything. There's utilities, there's insurance, right? There's all these other things that would go into keeping this building going. There's the upkeep of the building, et cetera, et cetera. We could go all day, but this just gives you an example. In order for anything to happen, you have to go through these entities, and these entities are privately owned. So you're not going to end that by spending more. It's just a ridiculous, concept. It's not to say you can't support or anything, but this is the crux of the problem is these things are privately owned by a few people, and they're not trying to share the money they're getting. They don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to, they definitely don't want to be appropriated of their property. The point is to boost the stockholder rate as much as they can.
If they are putting something into your community, trust and believe there's a motive behind it to get more wealth.
Exactly.
So like if I'm putting, even if I like a library, which, they're putting something for, there's gonna be a reason for them putting that there to get more wealth. Not just because we want kids to read more. No. There's gonna be a reason there's gonna be a method to make money off of that.
And you're buying public, like it's a way of reflecting your brand. It's like, oh, Walmart's in the community.
Yeah.
You know, even though Walmart don't pay nobody shit. Walmart's in the community. Walmart sponsored a Juneteenth event. Walmart's got ice cream. You know,
will they even do stuff like that just to Juneteenth? Well, they'll do stuff like that. They'll do stuff like that, even if it gives them a tax break or something, because that can keep them from having to spend money.
And it's actually cheaper. I don't want to get too deep in this because we got to close out, but it's cheaper for a business to donate a bunch of philanthropy, write that off in taxes, as opposed to just paying the tax rate and allow the state to distribute that money. It's cheaper, and they can be more directive over where they want their money to go. So if I need to if I need a brain drain a community, I'll say, we want to support Black STEM students, so I can take all the smart kids out of their community, send them to school, everybody feels great, and they never come back. And then they work for Google or whatever, and that's it, right? But it looks good because it's like a scholarship for Black kids and promoting diversity in the tech sector or something like this. They do that all the time, right?
So now I got new employees at Google who, sponsored this whole thing, and the community has what now?
An empty home.
Oh, okay.
Their best and the brightest now living in Boston or San Francisco.
Right, and the same applies to other countries, right? The United States like to draw the best talent of other countries, and that's brain drain too. It's its own type of cultural imperialism. Take the best workers, bring them here, drain the other countries so they can't catch up. So the same thing happens domestically, but it's seen as corporate philanthropy, something good of that nature. And I'm not saying don't take the scholarship. This isn't an individual judgment of anyone. We're not trying to do what they do. I'm just saying that's the broader sense of it. So anyway, so the collective wealth, we're gonna get more into this in the part 2 for people who check us out. We're gonna talk about different ways of thinking about how to build business and co-ops and stuff of that nature. But we do recognize that even though it's a patently false myth, Black people want to control the wealth we create, and that is a legitimate aspiration. And often you take the easiest thing accessible to you. So yeah, maybe buy Black is the thing you do, or circulate the dollar or whatever, even if these things don't actually correlate with how economy works. But the means of production need to be collectively owned for wealth to truly be shared the way Black people desire. So even if Black people owned everything in that picture that you saw earlier, those people have no reason to share any of that shit. So you could just have a bunch of wealthy folks who own all those things. That doesn't mean they're gonna share it with the rest of the Black people who live in that community. So even if it's not just white people, because not all white folks who own the means of production, it doesn't mean that that's gonna naturally be shared. Business owners have no reason inherently to share if it doesn't make sense business-wise. It's not built into it. It doesn't mean they're bad people. They just don't have any reason to do so.
Some of them are bad.
A good portion.
And it's at the end of the day, even if we say, for instance, Black people, we own every single mode of production. That doesn't mean that every single person who did own that, and we're gonna have the same priorities. Right. Plenty of people got Black owned businesses, and that doesn't mean that they're pouring all their money back into their community, because that's not why they did it. There are plenty of folks who say, yes, I opened a Black owned bookstore that I filled with only books by Black authors. And I am letting it be known that I'm dedicating half of the proceeds of my business to go back into these community programs. But even that's only half your money. You still opened a bookstore so you could make money.
And that's just
that's the reality of things. And so I think when we think of well, what do we do in order to be supportive, or not to say don't support a Black business, but don't assume that because you did that they were going to make sure that every single person in the hood was good. But you can then challenge them to do so when you step in these businesses, when they're popping up left and right. And because accountability in the community is important.
Exactly.
Yeah, an example, the Panthers used to, the Panthers for their food programs used to ask businesses in the community to give a portion of their funds to fund the food program.
And sometimes if they didn't do it, they would say we might boycott it or, might burn down. I don't know. Like things might happen to your business if you don't donate a particular set of proceeds to it. So this is to the point of that. We need an organization. We need to actually be thinking about what do people really need? Because we were talking about Cuba earlier, but it's like, and the idea that you have to start a business, you have to file with the government. People say that's authoritarian, but it's a question of like, if you're going to start a business, if you're really trying to help people, the question is, do we really need this shit? And a lot of businesses that get started, it's like, this isn't even helpful.
How much shea butter do we really need? We're not that ashy.
Hey, speak for yourself.
To just be honest, like if you're going to business to enrich yourself, just be honest. Don't tie it to any type of liberation or any type of rhetoric that says, this is the way to liberate Black people. Like, just be honest.
We cannot LLC our way to liberation.
No.
Yeah, you can't use capitalism to fight capitalism.
Yeah, it just doesn't. So you need an organization to define priorities in wherever community you live based on however you want to define that. You need to got to get past vibes and just chill and have to actually work with other people and talk to other people and and build a real assessment of what do people need and how do we get it to them and how do we build. You have to learn how to govern yourselves in that way, not just by spending. It's kind of a lazy way out, and you got to have the morals and ethics along with the material conditions for that. So that's essentially it. Some book recommendations here. The Color of Money, we quoted that by Marsha Baradadon. Black Awakening, Capitalist America, one of my favorite books that covers the transition in the late 60s into the 70s during all the quote unquote race riots and rebellions. And it showed how a lot of that got co-opted into Black capitalism. It's one of the best books on that. How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America by Manny Marable, who has passed Problems in Race, Political Economy, and Society. It's a great book. He goes through different sectors. He talks about Black bourgeoisie, Black working class. He talks about the way that Black women have gotten screwed over. It's a great structural analysis of just capitalism. Came out 82. We talked about this book earlier, The Myth of Propaganda of Black Buying Power, because a lot of times when you hear the circulation myth, you hear this other thing that Black people have 1.2 trillion or 1.7 trillion or whatever it is this year. I think now it's at about $2 trillion in spending power, and we don't spend it together. And that is not true. That myth, that whole thing is based on projections. It's not based on actual liquid cash or liquid wealth that people have. And Dr. Jared Ball does a good job breaking it down. And Black Scare Red Scare is not out yet, but it's by one of my former colleagues, Dr. Sharice Burton-Staley. You can pre-order it, and it's a good tracking of Black socialists and communists and how the government, wiped them out, and how this anti-communist, anti-socialist ideas persist today that persuade us away or dissuade us away from pursuing more collective means of action. So, that's all. You can find us
everywhere.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks.
Can we give them another round of applause? I want to thank our hosts of the Black Miss Podcast for this very exciting and informative conversation. We're going to open it up to Q&A, but we do have two questions, and I'm just going to put myself out there. I asked it to myself online because I'm really curious about this conversation. I know we always hear, the Black dollar only circulates one time or 6 hours at least. Right. And I'm under the philosophy that Black people, specifically of the African descent, should not be Black capitalists. We shouldn't be in a part of capitalism because we were products of it. We were used as the capital. So should we reimagine capitalism in our community and as African Americans in the United States? Should we think transnational or global economies about our dollar, about our money? how can we expand our economy without necessarily falling into the trap of capitalism, which is undermining, belittling, disrespecting our own people?
Well, I mean, on one level, just we'll look at it materially, right? When you're in a capitalist society, it's not a simple choice of, oh, I'm just gonna do socialism, because like we're talking about, the entire means of production is privatized. So what you want to do individually, it can only go so far because you're stuck in said society. But to answer the question directly, no, I don't think in the long term anybody should pursue it. But I say what I said, to preface that statement with, you have to find ways to transition out of stuff. So if we're gonna do any version of capitalism, whether that's a co-op, whether that's a business, whatever, then we have to have different attachments to it. Because basically, you put this much money into a business, and then people buy your shit, and you hope that the money you put in is less than what people buy, and that's what we'll call the profit, right? Or that's the margin. And then when it comes to a wage, you don't pay people based on the profit. You pay people based on your expenses. And then you're supposed to keep the profit of that labor. That's capitalism. So when it comes to the surplus that we get out of capitalism, if you even have it, because a lot of these businesses don't even have it, but even if you even have it, then the question becomes, where should that surplus go? Because you can pay yourself a salary based on your expenses, and the surplus can always go back into a community. So you can still say, like, we need to make enough money to meet what we put into it so we can pay everybody, et cetera, because people got to eat. You can't just, snap your fingers. In socialism, we talk about like scientific socialism, utopian. And a lot of utopian socialists think you can just kind of like end up there tomorrow. And it's not how it works. You just start a community somewhere. But the surplus is the question, where does it go? And that should be a question we should be asking any of these business owners. What are you doing with your surplus? Because you can say, I want to, I have a fish shop and I want to build 2 fish shops, or you can say I have this surplus and what does the community actually need? Now, if the community wants another fish shop, fine, but that should be a collective choice. You should figure out ways to make actual collective decisions in the spaces that you live, as opposed to only pursuing the bottom line. So I think that's the ways to actually figure out how to mingle with capitalism, because you're stuck in a capitalist society. I mean, even when we're talking about Cuba or other countries, they still have to deal on some level with capitalism because it's a global structure, and they pay for it by trying to pursue something else. But you look at, China's being demonized a lot today in media, and I would advise people to be skeptical of that. But China tried a strategy of like, we're going to open up the markets to bring in capital, but we're going to have a government that pushes a lot of that money towards things we need, and they've been able to lift, like over 500 million people out of severe poverty. If they were solely in pursuit of profit, they would have never been able to do that. So you think about the turnaround they've had since their revolution in '49, it's been remarkable. Regardless of how people feel about China, like, you have to respect that. But that's a choice to say, what are we going to do with our surplus? But if we're going to just throw our surplus back to the next business owner, then it's not gonna fix the problem. Like, that's how you transition out of that, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. Before I move on to my second question, I want to know if anyone else has a question in the audience. Yeah.
It's more, I don't know if it's a question, but anyway, I'll say it. So I see a lot on TikTok regarding like the retail aspect of Black businesses, and sort of like people getting upset that the Black community is not putting back into the retail aspect of Black businesses, and will also be like financial aspect of like, well, you guys charge more for things that I could get from somewhere else that don't charge as much, and then just that whole argument. So what would you guys like say about this?
Oh, I mean, I think it comes down to a couple of things, right? If I have bills to pay and I need to pay my rent, my light bill, put gas in my car, feed my family, and then somehow still clothe myself, if it's gonna come down to buying your $40 t-shirt that still costs you $2 to make, or buying a $5 t-shirt that they also only pay $2 to make, I'm gonna buy the $5 t-shirt. Now, if you are in a position where all of your base needs are met, and you know that you have a surplus and you want to support that business, then by all means, but you're not going to demonize me for not wanting to buy a $40 t-shirt that didn't cost you $40 to make. And so even when we talk about like community work and surplus, like if you were really 100%, if this business was 100% for the community, right? Then if you knew that it cost you $5 to make this t-shirt, you would sell that t-shirt for $5. Or sell it for $7 if you're like, I need that extra money to keep the lights on,
Right.
and to keep my Etsy shop up. And then, but I'm not going to overcharge. I'm not aiming to make a profit. I'm aiming to make sure that my community has what it needs. You would do that. Also, it's just a form of bullshit. You're not going to demonize Black people for not being able to spend excessively. You can have a conversation and hold folks accountable and be like, okay, you'll pay $500 for this Gucci bag, but you could have spent half of that and bought a selfie, and knowing that he actively has on the website where some of the proceeds are going. And so then you can have a conversation in that capacity. But even if somebody still said, it's my $500, I'm gonna do what I want with it, they not wrong. But that person might not, their priorities might not be in the community then. And then that's where those conversations go, in my opinion, of like, you need to challenge where folks' morals lie, where their priorities lie. And then from there, you can have conversations about what accountability look like. If I had never told you that I was about the people, don't assume it, regardless of if we just so happen to both be Black.
Yeah, be leery of any type of claim that tries to generalize Black people and then demonize us as a whole. Just because it plays into what we've been talking about, you know, these myths that try to place all the burden on our shoulders and not able to blame the actual people up top who are responsible for our oppression. And just the conditioning of Black people to believe the worst about themselves, like it's your fault because this business didn't happen, or it's your fault you're not in liberation and stuff like that. Just be leery of all that.
So it gives me the vibe like you're blaming me because your business, failed, right? Your business failed because I couldn't purchase your $40 t-shirt. It's also my fault that I don't, have enough money to go get groceries on top of getting your $40 t-shirt, on top of doing it. Like, so how much am I gonna get blamed for here?
It might also be an ugly ass t-shirt.
Yeah.
Honestly, even like I joked earlier, but if folks were prioritizing the types of Black businesses we were even open, there would be no need for 50 people selling shea butter. If you like shea butter and I like shea butter, why don't we just partner together and then we do something with that? But no, you did it separately because you wanted to keep that money in your pocket. And we didn't need that shit.
Yeah.
And then you could be on TikTok flexing, saying like, "Oh, look, I'm an entrepreneur."
And nobody buys my shit, even on the way.
Y'all don't support me.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the economic angle, and this is an issue of small businesses in general. Like, if you don't have as much capital, so what sometimes people charge higher because the only way for them to make money, quote unquote, is because they don't have as much capital, versus Walmart can do things for dirt cheap because they can suppress the labor or the wages of the labor. They get things cheaper. So that's why Walmart can always sell you things at a price point that a Black business may not be able to sell you at, simply because they don't have those means to do so. It doesn't always have to be because they're shitty or whatever. They just may not have the means to do so. And that's just a problem with small businesses face, generally speaking. It's harder for them to get the price down to the level that a bigger store may be able to get it down to. But what that also can create is this tendency to exploit your workers a little bit more, where you don't even clock people in, you're paying people under the table.
It's a family business.
Right.
Yeah. And now you got folks who can't make no money, but like you can just eat at the family restaurant since you can't buy groceries, because we need to make sure that we keep this in-house.
Right. Because I mean, I even worked at a corporation, was Pizza Hut, unfortunately. And this is why I always say I learn more about that shit than reading Karl Marx or anybody. I learn more about capitalism working at that shitty place. But like, they used to have a thing where the managers, I mean, even though this place would be busy as hell, the owner wanted to get more money out of the place. So the managers had to make all this money. And so what would happen was, after we were closed, after they closed, I just worked there. After they closed, they would tell us to clock out, and the manager would pay us double our wage off the books Otherwise, he was gonna get fired because the labor was too high. The store didn't want to pay for it. So even in places like that, it's just exploited. So a lot of Black businesses, I guess this is my issue, last point. My issue with a lot of Black business owners isn't that they're not like communists. I just like, y'all don't even understand capitalism a lot of times. Like, can we at least study that? Can we at least get that part right? You know what I'm saying? So it's not, no business gets to play off of just, oh, you should buy this shit because it's Black. Like, no other business functions. Like Walmart says this shit's cheap, so I'm gonna buy it because it's cheap, and I'm broke, so I'm gonna go to get the cheapest shit. That makes logical sense. But some kind of charity shit where I'm just solely supposed to buy this because it's Black, and we can't, to Cam's point, prove if it's even gonna do anything for us. Why?
Mhm.
You know.
And if a large corporation like Walmart that's in the global market doesn't pay their workers fair wages, what do you think that a small Black business, I mean, they talked about, so there's just something where they talk about where Black businesses could create jobs, but what's the quality of these jobs?
They never say it.
What do they have
Never
benefits? Do you
say
get
it.
fair wages? They never mention any of that.
They just be like jobs. And it's like, we can work at Walmart, bro. We don't, if that's all the jobs you're gonna create, you know what I'm saying? Like,
It doesn't actually mean anything, yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like we're being harsh on Black businesses,
We
but
are.
we are. But that's the reality of it. Like, if I'm shopping at a Black business, it's because I want to, I have the means, I have that surplus cash to do so. Don't count my pockets because I went to go get what I needed cheaper somewhere else. That, was you shit on Black people saying we're not fiscally responsible, but it is very irresponsible for me to go purchase a $40 t-shirt that's $5 here. And I got kids to feed. I don't have the kids.
Now I got less money to put back in my community.
Exactly.
So I bought your $40 t-shirt instead of a $5 t-shirt, kept my $35, and then went to the Black restaurant and got something to eat.
So if I do buy your $40 t-shirt, say thank you, give me my receipt, have a good day, leave it at that. I don't need your Twitter rant, your TikTok rant saying, oh, you're not, y'all don't support us. No other business operates like that.
Yeah, it's not an obligation, man.
No other business does that.
Not an obligation.
Love y'all still.
All right, next question.
Anybody else have-
So,
Don't be shy.
I was just off of what you all were mentioning, ways that media could influence, like, especially in recent times, Black people who even want to start a business through like the falsehood of like the statistics that they put out there and like promote around Black business. Or even what I'm thinking about is like this idea of like the social value of starting like a Black business in the sense of like how that has been like co-opted and adopted by like companies like NBC and ABC and so forth, which then trickles down to then other like BET and so forth, which then trickles down to even social media, which then impacts the individual and like makes them think, oh, I can make money right now. So then they start the Black business and feel like there's profit almost in their Blackness in that moment in time. So I think that's pretty interesting.
yeah, I mean, you really said it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working on a book right now called Laundering Black Rage. And what got me to think of, I won't get into the premise of the book, that's not the point today, but like what got me to think about the topic was like, once George Floyd was killed, we saw this massive, everybody's Black Lives Matter, every motherfucker had a diversity statement, and this is terrible, and heinous. And then we also saw this flood of cash into, into philanthropy. And I was just always weirded out, like, how in the hell does like Buy Black have anything to do with this? Or somebody working at some Black person getting a raise at Chase, on the corporate executive level. What does that have to do with
a man getting
murdered?
I don't.
It was always so I was trying to understand. So the point I was trying to understand, like, how do we go from that to this? And so it's odd that I'm gonna come right back to you. Like, it's odd that like on the book I was tracking how Buy Black never was higher in Google Trends, the search of it, than after George Floyd got murdered. So why is that being promoted? Why was Black wealth and Black Wall Street? Why is the solution to this capitalism? But that had been, to your point about media, that had been projected out as Black people don't have any wealth. And if they had wealth, maybe the police wouldn't kill them. Like, that was the logic of it, right? So all of a sudden that became the main thing. You look at the corporations where they put their money, most of it was put in like venture capitalist funds or business or black banks or whatever. And it was like an article in Washington Post, over $50 billion was spent or was promised, it wasn't spent, by the top 50 corporations. And, you know, most of it was toward that kind of thing, but go ahead.
Just with some of the readings that I'm doing for some classes right now, Derek Bell and Faces at the Bottom of the Well, and like the idea that racial progress is synonymous, or racism and liberal democracy are synonymous ideas to one another, in the sense that
Right, it's built in.
that's kind of how I feel like with what you're saying. The only reason that they're investing that money into it is because they recognize that they have to. If they didn't, they would lose
Legitimacy.
they will lose legitimacy on their part, as well as us buying into their ideas, which then kind of creates that push and pull aspect of like in the whole sense, the only, I don't know, basically what you said is what I'm kind of getting at. I'm getting like a flood of ideas in my brain right now, but it's that
That's
whole
us every
idea.
episode. You like press stop record and then like, and anyway,
But yeah, just like that whole idea of like how I personally think that like an aspect of racism in a modern sense is the appropriation of it, like
Yeah.
in terms of like.
Exactly, you on it, man. Yeah, you on it.
they don't have to tell us that it's because we're Black that the society is going to continue to actively seek to diminish it. They're going to now make us think that it's all of our fault, and that if we all get rich, we'll be just fine. You know, if you are wealthy enough, the police won't kill you. If you are educated enough, you won't go to jail. If we all got an LLC and we just get it popping and we make enough money, we can be liberated. But that's not true. And all it's doing is just creating larger divides. Like, class would not function if somehow we could all get rich.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a need for a class.
Rich
Yeah,
people
they
ain't trying to
pushed
see that
Good
either.
point. Yeah.
They like living in their gated communities.
They pushed all of us.
They
through
make
the-
money off of us being poor.
They pushed all of us through the other education system, saying that, you know, you get educated, you get a good job, you still get shot in the streets. You know, us getting educated didn't cure racism.
But it's a class thing too, but
It's
it's like,
yeah.
it's like the people who get killed by the police primarily are, you know, poor,
Poor and
Black males, or people with mental health issues, or trans women. Those are the people that get killed by the police. If you look at the statistics primarily, it's not the Black bourgeoisie that's even getting hit. So there's an appropriation even interracially by a class of Black people who are not nearly affected by racism in the same way. They're mad about microaggressions. Someone else is trying not to get stopped and frisked and sent to prison. These are not the same things, right? You know, so it's like, there's also appropriation where there's a collaboration between the Black elite and capital to appropriate the struggles that are primarily related to poor Black people who go through the worst days, to then get a grant or hired or a job or a diversity appointment or et cetera, but they're not even the ones experiencing the shit. It's not to say they don't experience racism. We all do. We all go through that. But I'll take a microaggression over being sent to prison any day. You know, and I think most of us would. So it's just like, those things aren't the same thing, or, oh, I can't move into this neighborhood, and that's just a longer history of the Black bourgeoisie putting their interests in front of everyone else, and then trying to tell us that all those interests are the same, like collapsing the category that Black is just this just dynamic that doesn't matter what class you are, everybody's gonna go through it the same way. And I think that's something that, you know, we also have to confront when we're talking about business and all that. We also got to confront the class issue. You know, for those of us who may end up in that class or in that class, people always trying to push their problems and exploit the problems of poor Black people and working class Black people, you know, so we can bitch about, you know, oh, they don't own a bus or whatever, you know, because you want to push your problems and then make it about act like this is about everybody else, when it's just not.
I don't know if Black mentioned this, but a good book to look up is The Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin.
Yeah, it's
Frazier.
another good one, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of goes into a lot of the rhetoric of the Black bourgeoisie that you hear now is not new.
And that book was what, 1942, one?
Maybe, I don't know. Don't quote us on
Somewhere in
it.
the 40s. Yeah.
But these narratives is not new. the idea of buying black, they was used against poor and working class Black people even back then. So if you guys want to check that out.
Anyone else? Sorry, we talking forever.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm curious about what you are thinking about talking about on part 2 when it comes to solutions and maybe socialist approaches to developing new economies. And to this conversation that we're having about class inside the Black community, I'm thinking that it's appropriate to look toward working class communities to look at the kind of alternative economies and informal economies that have been established over, for as long as Black people have been working and
Right.
laboring, right? But in terms of the contemporary moment, what do you have to say about informal economies and about socialist experiments inside Black communities?
I think to begin there, right, we have to think about what are the needs of our community? What are the priorities? So even in a simple space, say for instance, you have a community town hall. If every person that was Black in your community came to your community town hall and we were like, what does the community need? And you would make a list and then we go, what all does the community have? What all do we have access to? And then you're really asking folks, what are you willing to contribute to ensure that everybody that has a need, it gets met? And in that capacity, then we're beginning to do the work, right? And then you can clearly see who's not willing to put in, who's not willing to be supportive. And then you make decisions on what does that look like for you as well? What are the repercussions to be in our community, but not be community centered? And I think in that capacity, then we get to look at an analysis and even with that, right, you still won't see dollars circulating. Folks, you're still gonna have to, we still don't own the means of production, but at least then we know that whatever that surplus is, that your community is willing to redistribute it so that nobody within your community will be without the basics. It's I want to make sure that every single person in my community has shelter, has food, has some level of health care, even if that's not insurance, even if that is, we have a nurse in our community who's going to go check on you because you're sick. And then whatever is left over, as a community, we make a decision of, if everybody's needs are met, do you just keep whatever is left for yourself? Do we put that towards a community initiative? Do we save up for something? And then, but you're making those decisions together. It's not oh, well, you live in your mansion, you live in a shack, you live over here, but we all Black and we not doing nothing about it. So at least for me, that's really where community organizing comes into place.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, that episode's not fully figured out yet. But I think I do have a friend of mine who no longer really is an entrepreneur, but he did it for a while. And I want to pull an entrepreneur because he's a full out communist, right? But he used to really he went through it all. He's raised money, he's been in a lot of these spaces, he's gotten financing and all of that. So he can tell you about what they could do if they just shared or whatever. He can give that perspective in ways that some of us who've never been in those rooms can. And I think looking at other models that people currently present, I think sometimes things that are socialist, we don't call them that. But it's if you have a tenants union or something like they have out in Kansas City that basically forces to keep the prices at a certain level in an apartment complex, that is effectively a socialist program. It's not a full blown out society, but you're trying to keep it down. So I think a lot of the stuff we do, I don't think we know is socialist or whatever. So the other thing we want to do with that episode is point out things we're already kind of doing, and maybe there's ways to develop that. I always tell this story. This is a really small nugget. It doesn't need anything the grand scheme of political economy or whatever, but it just kind of hit me. It was always funny. I was in South Africa, and I remember we were staying at this Airbnb or whatever. I was on tour, and I was with these Africans in South Africa were hosting me, had not met them until I got there, had looked out for me the whole time, made sure I had something to eat. And we got to the Cape Town, we were mainly in Johannesburg, And I bought this like big New York style pizza and I had it in my room because I hadn't ate like a New York style pizza or pizza at all for like a month. And I remember I left it in my room, and then the morning after I came out, I had the box. I put it on the table. I was about to grab a plate. Without even thinking, everybody just opens the box and snatches all the pieces and leaves me like 2. You know, but honestly, I had to check myself. I mean, they didn't even think about it. They were talking. It would be like we were talking, put the food there, pick it up, and we just move on. And it hit me like, I don't need all that pizza.
Right.
Like, I'm not even gonna eat it all. You know, so for them, it was like, yeah, you put the pizza down, it's ours. Because we've been sharing everything your whole trip. So it wasn't even a thought. It wasn't like a deep convo. It was just a split second, like everybody took the pieces. They didn't take all of it, they left me some pieces. But it was probably 10 pieces and it was like 2 in like 2 seconds. You know, but it's just that thing we do, we share all the time. Like, who hasn't cashed app somebody and been like, yo, you can hold this? You know, who hasn't done those things? Who doesn't move in? Who doesn't know people who moved back in with their parents rent-free to save money? Or people who moved in with a friend rent-free to save money so they can go out and do whatever? Or people who floated. Like, we do this stuff all the time, but we don't think about it like that because it's just what we do. But when you care about people and you are invested in their well-being, you always are going to figure out a way to take care of them. You know, so we also have to think about like, what are ways to make those connections stronger, not try to always reinvent something else. A lot of those relationships are already built in. You know, that's why capitalism wants to alienate people, because once you alienate folks, they don't have those kind of relationships. Oh, any other questions? I thought she was coming to show you.
Go for it.
It reminded me of the Black Panther like survival program, because I'm pretty sure like it's bigger than just the food. They were like working with doctors and nurses in the community to try to create like trauma centers, creating like again, not even like going to the police, but like holding people accountable by like having like watches in a sense like that. So it's just like almost like going back to the past as well, like knowing your history and like knowing what to look at to try to reimagine it today.
Well, and so many people, like Black said, like we do this stuff every day. And so really when it comes like, when we think of solution, it's like, how do we collectively do this? How do we get people to align on a goal? How do we get people to go from to rebuke an individualistic mindset, come into a larger collective one, and go against what this system is trying to continue to get us to do, is to see this as a me. I need to take care of just me, myself, and I, or me and my family, or me and, the notion of me and mine. You only need to be around like-minded people. I can't have no stragglers in my crew.
Mhm.
Like all of those narratives, I can only have winners in my circle. I can only have friends who got businesses, that are doctors, that are lawyers. Like all of those things are used to create classes and divisive groups within us. And so when you say, that's cute, do I want a friend who's a doctor? Yes. Not because I want to be able to utilize the fact that you got money and you got status, but no, I want to be able to know that if I have an illness, that I can call upon this person in my community to care for me, or to care for someone else. Like my brother next week graduates law school. Very excited, his first one in the family. And we've already joked that the moment that anything goes wrong, I now have a lawyer to call. My shirt for graduation says, "Don't fuck with me, I'll call my lawyer." And
Can I actually get his number?
I got you. And even when I talk to him about like, what does next steps look like for you? And since he's been in grad school and been in this track, of course, everyone initially is like, go into corporate law, you can make so much money. And he was like, I literally could not function if my soul was being sucked dry every day. And even though the legal system as a whole is a leech and it's broken, he's still like, within the system that I'm going to be in, like, what can I be doing that's going to be helpful for my community? What can I do that's going to leverage my ability to continue to serve? And so even thinking through, like, how do we navigate in the capitalistic society that we are in? Because we're not going to just exit. There's nowhere where we're going to go.
Right.
It's like, as we reimagine, it's like, what can we be doing that allows us to create space for equity for others?
Yeah, and I think sometimes on a more like basic level, it's not always, we don't want to sell that everybody has always meet together and everybody talk about something. There has to also be development of leadership where you understand what your role is. And like there's stuff even with this podcast, I'm the leader, I guess, of it, but I don't run everything we do by everybody because they trust me to do what's right. If I don't, then I will hear it. And that's fine, because if I messed up something, if I fucked up somewhere, you also have to have people that are willing to hold you accountable. It's not always going to be every decision is quote unquote collectively made or some kind of, it's like this ultra democratic decision. Some things are on the person who is in charge of a certain thing, but you have to be thinking about how does that relate to the group? If I took this event and I just said, well, I'm gonna take the money everybody else is paying, I'm gonna just come here and do Blackness Podcast. And y'all can watch it on Zoom. Like that's the kind of shit that people will do sometimes. And it's like, no, you should share that with everybody, because we are a group, we are a collective, regardless of what one's role is over the other, right? And then lastly, on the Black Panther thing, the survival programs, I think sometimes people miss that in the sense that those programs are always survival programs. They would say pending revolution. So what they were trying to do was teach you how you could govern your community. And hopefully their goal was that the people in the community would want those programs to take over those programs. Or the Panthers didn't even necessarily have to run them. And then when the government comes in and takes it from you, you want those programs so much that you're willing to fight. And then that leads to a confrontation. So it was always an understanding that it's not enough to just like share the little money here. That's just preparing us for something that we can't really talk about in this meeting, but that's preparing us for a much more broader fight that goes beyond just the program or whatever, because at the end of the day, the means of production, like we said, are privately owned, and that's not gonna be changed by, just buying Black or anything like that. Like, if you wanna get control of that,
It's gonna require struggle.
it's gonna require some real struggle. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are at time, but let's give our host another round of applause. On behalf of the Center for Black Diaspora, African Black Diaspora Studies, and the Black Cultural Center, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for coming to share all of your knowledge and the wealth of information with our audience. And thank you to the audience for being great and listening to our hosts and asking some amazing questions. So we want to share that the center has a couple more events this quarter. On May 11th, next Thursday, we'll be back in this room. The Swiftly Fading Residue of Soon Forgotten Dreams on Love and Madness with Lamar Jarrell Bruce. That's at 5 p.m. and